Minister Gould, thanks for taking the time for Power Play today.
Sure, happy to be here.
How concerned are you about a rise in anti-Semitism in Canada since October 7th?
Oh, I mean, Todd, I'm really concerned about it, particularly with the escalation that we saw this past week in Montreal with the Molotov cocktail that was left outside of a synagogue and Jewish community center, as well as the gunshots that were fired through two Jewish schools in Montreal. Um, I, it's something that, I mean, it feels unbelievable to be happening here in Canada. And I think something that we all need to be very concerned about and very worried about that we don't see further escalation. And actually, what we need is, um, a de-escalation here in Canada to ensure that Jewish Canadians and all Canadians feel safe in this country to be who they are without fear of being attacked for what they believe.
Your colleague Anthony Housefather, as you're familiar, of course, a Liberal MP, a leader in Montreal's Jewish community, telling this program earlier this week, Karina, he has never experienced anti-Semitism anywhere close to what he has in the last month. Is the same true for you? Because I know this is also personal for you. Your grandparents survived the Holocaust.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen this kind of anti-Semitism in Canada in my lifetime. It makes me profoundly sad to see this. It makes me extremely concerned. And what I'm hearing from friends and folks that I know across the country is they're really feeling the same way right now. And I think what is so important right now is that we need to lower the tension here in Canada. People have very legitimate feelings. There's a lot of hurt from what's happening between Israel and Hamas, the humanitarian situation in Gaza. There's a tremendous amount of hurt right now. But what is really important is that you don't look at another Canadian, regardless of whether they're Jewish or Muslim, Israeli or Palestinian Canadian, and hold them accountable for the actions of be it the government of Israel or Hamas, and see them first and foremost as a Canadian. And I think that's something that I'm profoundly concerned about. And it doesn't even mean that it's either side that's doing that. We know that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are two sides of the same coin. And so we need to do everything possible, not just to condemn hate, but to really make sure that it doesn't stem in this country at all.
Let me ask you, the Prime Minister has said that this isn't who we are as Canadians, but respectfully, if it's happening in this country, isn't it a part of some of the people of who they are? And don't we need to acknowledge it and address it sort of realistically?
Well, I think what he's referring to is that Canada is a diverse and inclusive country. And this is where I think Anthony and the comments of many others is saying we've never felt like this before, is to say that we as Canadians need to see each other as Canadians first. And I can tell you that amongst, Jewish Canadians, there's always that knowledge that anti-Semitism is kind of lingering under the surface. There's a lot of trauma from the history of the Jewish people that kind of, keeps you on edge knowing what happened. I mean, you mentioned my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. So you know that it can be present and that it is. I think it was so quickly unleashed. And I'm not talking about, pro-Palestinian protests or calls for ceasefires or any of that. That's all legitimate, protests that citizens are having. It's when what we see in Montreal or the targeting of Jewish businesses or the targeting of Jewish people just because they're Jewish. What we've seen an escalation of over the last month that is particularly concerning. And it's coming from many different places, across the spectrum in Canada that I think is particularly concerning. And it kind of reminds the Jewish community of how much of a minority they are in this country. And I think that's something that has led to a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. And we need to be doing everything we can to combat that.
The United States and President Joe Biden this week expressly rejecting the idea, Karina, of a ceasefire, saying it'd be propaganda, victory for Hamas, and legitimize their terrorism. Do you share that position? What's your take?
Well, look, the government of Canada has been very clear that we are not calling for a ceasefire, but we are calling for humanitarian pauses, and we are calling for extended humanitarian pauses. We believe in Israel's right to defend itself, but we also have been the first country to declare that we would provide humanitarian aid to innocent civilians in Gaza, and we've been advocating for humanitarian corridor and unimpeded access. Look, there was a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel until October 7th, when Hamas broke that and brutally attacked 1,400 Israelis and took 240 hostages, and sorry, not just those 1,400 were people that they killed, and the 240 hostages that remain with Hamas in Gaza. So we continue to hope and advocate for a two-state solution, but at this point in time, we want to see that humanitarian access, and really ensure that the humanitarian situation in Gaza and for innocent Palestinians improves, because we're very concerned about what's going on there. This is an extraordinarily complex situation, but our position remains for humanitarian pauses. And I think Canada has always played an important role in trying to bring people together and trying to advocate for peace. And that's, where we want to get to eventually.
Just quickly before we go, I know that your colleagues, both Jewish and Muslim backgrounds, meet together fairly often, and there are obviously different positions on the idea of a ceasefire. Are any minds being changed in those meetings? Is it about keeping dialogue going? What can you tell us?
Yeah, so since the beginning of this, since October 7th, we've been meeting on a regular basis, Jewish and Muslim caucus within the Liberal Party, because there's a lot of hurt on both sides, right? And it's about continuing to dialogue, continuing to recognize each other as Canadians, to talk about how, in fact, we can de-escalate things here in Canada. We all have a lot of hurt for what's happening in the Middle East, but I think we all have a lot of hurt for what's happening here. We're talking about anti-Semitism, but there's also been a terrible rise in Islamophobia as well. And we absolutely agree as colleagues that we need to do everything we can to ensure the safety, the security, the feeling of being able to be who you are here in Canada. And that's one of the things that we talk about a lot, is what we can do as members of parliament, as colleagues, as leaders in our community, to be there for the folks who are hurting, but also to stand against hate and to make sure that we're standing up for each other, and protecting Canadians first and foremost.
Karina Gould is the Liberal government's House Leader. She is also an MP for the riding of Burlington, west of Toronto. Thank you for your time, Minister Gould. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Todd.